Hello, hello, hello. This is Laylee, your host in Invivo Leadership Strategies Podcast. I am joined by Terry Lee, who is an expert speaker. He's a coach. He is your ultimate leadership catalyst, and he's helping leaders break through their blind spots and communicate with power. He has over 20 years of experience in training, keynote speaking, and leadership development. Now, Terry's mission is to help leaders win. You got that right. WIN. W-I-N. If you're wondering what those acronym means, this is your podcast to listen. We are diving into how to win. Let's get started. Well, Terry, it is so wonderful to have you. Can you tell us more about you and what you do?
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Laylee, first and foremost. And a little bit about who I am. So born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, married to my wife for 30 plus years now. And I also have two kids, 28 and 27, or 28 and 24. My son is 28, my daughter is 24, and my son has a daughter. She is 5. So I'm also a grandparent as well. And that's a little bit about who I am. What I do is I've been doing leadership development and professional development for about almost 20 years now, and have been trying to transition some of my work, my TL Speaks incorporated business work, to more keynotes and workshops, and been trying to transition to that. A lot of my leadership development has been in the training field, which I absolutely love. But in previous years, I'm seeming to be a little more energized in delivering more keynote talks on leadership development. And specifically, the framework I use is a WIN framework. And that is an acronym for understanding who you are, igniting your superpowers, and nurturing yourself and others. So everything I talk is in the context of that. Everything I talk about and teach is in the context of that.
I love that, because at the end of the day, you are the person who delivers it. You are the one who is in charge. You are the one in control. So it all comes back to you. I love that.
Yeah. I think self-awareness, I think, is a position of strength, because when you are self-aware, you can make the necessary adjustments you need to connect with others. And when you're not, sometimes you think you're doing it, but you're really not doing it.
This actually takes me right into our topic, because you are such a great communicator. And I really think that the listeners who are tuned in can take so much out of your experience and your work. So with that, with communication, how can leaders effectively assert themselves, whether it's in meetings or being in front of people, without being perceived as aggressive or passive?
Okay, I think that's a great question. And I think you have to start with understanding the definition of assertiveness.
Mhm.
So sometimes people think assertiveness is being direct, but you don't necessarily have to be direct to be assertive. That's part of assertiveness. That's one end of being assertive. But I think when you think about assertiveness, the differentiation between being aggressive and being passive is assertiveness offers an invitation to the conversation. So you can be direct and share your points, but when you offer that invitation into the conversation, that is assertive. When you're direct and you don't offer that, that's aggressive. When you're indirect and you don't offer that invitation into the conversation, that's passive. But I think assertiveness is really just being clear about what you want, and then inviting a conversation about what is it that you're looking for, what is it that you need, or what is it about the decision that we're trying to make. So it's an invitation to the conversation, because we're not all wired the same way. Some people are very direct, some people are less direct,
Mhm.
but the invitation to the conversation is really where assertiveness lives.
That's so strong, Terry, because I feel like a lot of us are scared to practice that assertiveness. But you're right, the definition matters so much. Have you noticed that there are reasons behind that worriness? Are we just scared to practice it? What are some things you've noticed about us with the practice of assertiveness?
I think it is the perception. I think there are some people who are not comfortable with directness. They're comfortable being direct, but they're not comfortable with others being direct with them. There's others that are maybe they're a little more reserved and they're uncomfortable with the directness, and vice versa. There's people who are direct and they're uncomfortable with reservation. So being able to be comfortable with how you communicate, but then also being clear about what it is that you need, whether you're direct with it or whether it comes out a little bit softer. I think you have to be okay with the type of communicator you are. And then it goes back to the invitation to the conversation. Let's talk about this from this standpoint. So I think people are a little cautious. Sometimes people are cautious because they don't want to step on someone's toes, or they're cautious or reticent to say something because maybe the other party is direct and they don't want to be perceived as not direct or less assertive. So I think you it goes back to self-awareness and understand or not. It's about how you assert yourself, and you have to be okay with that.
Mm. The comfort, that's the first time I'm hearing in a communication to be comfortable with your communication style. Usually what I hear is change it, shift it, but you're saying just sit with it and understand where you're coming from. Am I
Yes.
understanding that right?
Yep. Yep. And a good example, I mean, if you think of, I talked about public speaking, and if you think about speakers, and I'll say, I'll use Tony Robbins,
Mm.
Malcolm Gladwell. Tony Robbins, very direct, assertive. Malcolm Gladwell, reserved, yet still assertive. And they both are very good keynote speakers. Now, if you like the high energy, you like Tony Robbins. If you like that paced energy, you like Malcolm Gladwell. But both, again, they assert themselves in their keynote speeches. They assert themselves in their coaching. They assert themselves in the conversation. But then again, two polar opposite in style.
Love that example. Just cook with what you got, just
Yes.
cook with
Yeah.
what you got.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too we have to be careful of is sometimes we in organizations it's perceived that I have to be a certain way. And if you can get there, fine. But eventually it's going to exhaust you if it's not your natural preference. So being cautious of, okay, if I'm more reserved, I have to be more direct in certain situations, yes. But do I need to be direct all the time? It's just not the case.
Mhm, mhm. Well, this is great. So I want to give a scenario because I think both sides, whether you're reserved or you're more outspoken, deal with the interruptions when they're speaking. Now, I want to know what are some of the best ways to handle interruptions and being spoken over in professional setting. And I think especially when you're dealing with maybe more dominant personalities in that room.
I think there's a couple ways you can address that, and one is relationship building. And in relationship building, you're going to understand certain styles. And in the relationship building process, as you start to understand other people's style, they will understand your style. And when you're in a room together, they're likely to line up and people are less likely to cut you off. Now, that doesn't say it's never going to happen. But when you have a relationship and there's someone, say I'm in a relationship with somebody that's more direct than me, if I have a good relationship with them, it's easier for me to say, hey, Laylee, I know you have some good points to make. Can you hold? I want to make my points and then invite you to make your points. Or I would ask you that you let me finish my points and then invite you to finish your points. Now, if you don't have that relationship, then it goes back to being able to flex to that direct style and saying almost the exact same thing is um, there was an opportunity for you to talk. I'd like to take these few moments to share my insights, and then we can have a conversation about what we both think or what the whole room is saying. But you have to, this goes to assertiveness. You have to assert yourself. You can't be passive, and you can't be aggressive and bully your way into the conversation.
hmm So if it's okay, I want to put myself on the spot just so that I can help me. There are times where I'm maybe more reserved than I like to be. And so let's say I'm in a scenario where there is a group of people and I'm talking and I get interrupted and I feel really icky telling that person that I don't have a relationship with to, hey, like, it- I'm only saying this to you, Terry. I wouldn't say this like, hush, let me talk. What would you advise for me in that example?
Okay, so we we put meanings on, we make meaning of things that happen to us, our experiences.
Yeah.
So the advice I would say is, because someone's interrupting, don't automatically put the meaning that is making you feel icky that you have to say something, or meaning that this person is rude, they're cutting you off. So eliminate whatever meaning you're putting on that experience,
Mhm.
and then allow yourself the space, value yourself enough to assert yourself, to give you the space to say, hey, even if you don't have that relationship. And it's a practice. It's not easy. It's easy to say this on this podcast, but it's a, get into the practice of saying, especially if someone's cutting you off, hey, I know you have a lot to say. I want to make sure I get my points in. And then, or maybe if another way you can say that is, can you put a pause on that, or can you put a pin in that? I know it's going to be valuable to the conversation, but here's something I want to add, especially if you were already talking.
Mhm.
So I think the other piece of that is you have to get comfortable with the language that you want to use. Now I'm using, hey, put a pause in that or put a pin in that. So it takes some practice for you to find that language that is easy for you to say, that allows you to assert yourself, to prevent people from cutting you off, or to stop that behavior.
Language is such a great point. And I think some of that also stems in the storytelling piece of what you're selling and what you're communicating. So, how can storytelling, going out of interruption and really thinking about what you're saying, how can that be a powerful leadership tool that you can use, whether it's to inspire teams or influence key stakeholders, or you're in that room and you want to be heard? What can you do to really use that?
All right. I mean, if you go back historically to communication in the beginning, it was all storytelling. It was stories about the land. It was stories about the people, and stories connect people. The logic. So you're talking about logos and uh, pathos, right? So the story is the connection. The logic is kind of the glue. And you if you think about gluing something together, you got to connect it first before the glue will work.
Mhm.
And if you can tell a story that brings me closer to your experience, or brings your experience closer to me, then I have more of an opportunity to make that connection. And I think it's easier in a kind of a presentation setting or a keynote setting, because you're standing up on a stage and you can tell those stories in front of the room and kind of draw the audience in and say, excuse me, here's how this story relates to your experience in this world. Where you don't see it is in the meeting rooms, in the boardrooms, because people are so dead set on getting things checked off the agenda. You're getting things checked off the agenda, but you're not making any connection with your team. So being able to share, say your team's going through change, and being able to share a story of when you were in that position and you went through that change, and you went from one type of person to another type of person, but in that process, you had all these challenges.
Mhm.
Talking about, in that process, you had all these challenges. You're gonna connect to five different people in the room, because those challenges are similar to the challenges that they're having. Or say you want to motivate someone to a vision, or strategy, a story that relates to the strategy is important in order for people to connect and get on board and they kind of ride the wave.
Mhm.
And oftentimes going, and it goes back to that word invitation, where I was talking about in assertiveness, an invitation to the process, an invitation to the conversation, an invitation to whatever we're trying to do makes it easier for people to follow you as a leader. And one of the ways to do that is through story.
And sometimes when we're sharing these stories, especially if we're dealing with people who are very number driven, right? The quantitative, the data driven, the architects of our world, how do we mesh that storytelling to have that number piece in it?
Yeah, I think it's one of the misnomers about, especially people who don't like stories, is they think stories are long. But you can tell a 5 second story. For example, I'll give you a quick story. When I was in high school, I was on a relay team, a track 400-meter relay team. And 6 weeks before our state championship, our coach told us we were going to break the record. And between that time he told us, and in between that 6 weeks, we eventually broke the record. But when he said that to us, he gave us a new level that we could strike towards. That's a story you can tell somebody in a group where you're presenting a challenge to them, and you want to give them a North Star. You want to give them a point. So you tell that quick story to say, the reason I tell you this story is because we have 6 weeks to operate in this. And each time we connect, we're going to get a little bit better. And we may not get to the destination tomorrow, but every tomorrow will add up and we will get to that destination in the 6 weeks. And then you fill in kind of the process, the logic of it. So storytelling, if it's not a preference or if it's not a general practice, that's also something you want to get into the practice of. Maybe you don't do it in your staff meeting initially. You do it at home with a spouse or significant other or a child or a colleague, and say, how does this story land? And then you eventually use it.
Mhm. Oh, I love that. And then thinking about this, because I'm an anxious person, and anyone who knows me will say Laylee's got some really fun anxiety that's always there. And I've been so fortunate to work on it, to get it to a place where I can control it and bring that to my clients. And a lot of the times, the clients that I have, they're new leaders and they're scared to speak publicly. They have a lot of anxiety. What would you tell them? How can these new leaders overcome public anxiety and maybe develop a more confident speaking presence?
That I think it's along the lines of what most people in their heads say about um, storytelling. They think stories are long. The same thing holds true with public speaking, because when you say public speaking, I would guarantee 9 times out of 10, if you talk to 10 people, 9 people would say public speaking is standing on a stage in front of an audience.
Right.
But that is really only about 10% of the population. That are the people who speak professionally. Public speaking is really telling stories, sharing updates, gaining data, giving data to colleagues that you're already comfortable with. And when you put that meaning on speaking in public or private in the office setting, however you want to say that, you already are a public speaker. So I think one of the ways to reduce anxiety is get rid of the vision that you have of what a public speaker is, because that's what most people say. Public speaking, stand on stage, speaking to a large audience. But 90% of the time, public speaking is speaking to a small group of people who you most likely know on a topic that you are most likely comfortable with, and you have a lot of information that they need to give.
Mhm.
And that's the first thing I always share when I work with somebody on public speaking or who has anxiety around speaking.
Well, Tara, we are redefining assertiveness. We're redefining storytelling. We're redefining our public speaking, which I really, really like because you're right. Most of the time when I talk to the leaders, that's the perception that they have with all those terminologies. So, how can we as leaders be our most authentic self while we are tailoring our communication style to our different audiences?
I um I think I think you have to balance that. Like the word authentic, you can't bring 100% of yourself 100% of the time to all the places, but you should try to bring most of yourself, which again goes back to being able to share more about who you are versus what you do. So in the beginning, when you asked me about, tell us a little bit about yourself, I started with who I am because we're very good at practicing what
Mhm.
we do. We go to networking events, we're at work. The first thing people ask is, what department do you work in, or where do you work? And it's all about the what. We have to get in the practice of telling people who we are. And that's, maybe what's telling stories of what shaped your leadership philosophy. Give an example of why you think a certain way. So when people have a kind of a glimpse or a peek of who you are, they have a better understanding of where you're coming from. Oftentimes, people will give you get you get less connection when people respond to you from a title or when people respond to you from a level. You get more connection when people are responding with an understanding of who you are, what shaped you. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with them all the time, but knowing where they're coming from, um, showing that authentic piece is not having people guess where you're coming from.
Mhm.
I'll share if we have a moment. An activity that I learned this summer that I think is so powerful for people to be more authentic in their conversation. It was a conference I went to, and the speaker was Rene Rodriguez, and he asked the question, "What's your favorite color?" So if I were to ask you, what's your favorite color? What would you say, Laylee?
Oh, I would say gold. Does that
All right.
count?
We're talking about authenticity. He said, when people ask you a question like that, what's your favorite color? And you say gold, I can take gold and I can just run with why gold might be your favorite color.
Mhm.
But if people ask you what's your favorite color, you should end with, and this is why gold is my favorite color. So give them the context around why gold is your favorite color. Give them the context of how you got into this leadership role. Give them the context of what shaped your leadership style. Give them the context of why you think this is the best direction we should go. So give context versus giving direction. And I think that is a huge piece of bringing authenticity to the conversation and to your team.
Yeah, you reminded me of Simon's Ask Why, like the core of why it is that you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that resonates so much with even the transparency in how we talk to each other. Forget the public speaking, just having vulnerable conversations and knowing each other's whys.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um, what is your philosophy of leadership that's helped you be who you are today?
To me, I think it all goes back to the evolution of that win framework I talked about in the beginning. So that came from a couple of experiences. Are you familiar with best places to work? Some states call it a little bit different.
Yes, I
So
am.
uh,
Yeah.
I've been to a few luncheons where people have won best place to work, and when I heard those leaders speak, it always resonated to me like this is what leadership is because in their story, they were very clear on what they wanted in the company that they built. They're also very clear on who they needed. And when you're clear on who you need, that means you understand what you can and cannot do. And things that you cannot do, you build staff to do that. So that's the W part of that, the who. And then the I is igniting superpowers. So when you bring those people into that organization, that other who, and your skills as well, when you mesh those together, you let the people do what you hired them to do. You allow them to ignite their superpowers, um, and match your powers with them. And you have a whole team that's kind of operating from a position of strength. And then as your company grows, you nurture those relationships and you nurture yourself and your skills, because as the company grows, your skills need to change. Some things might have to shift. You might have conflict, but as you nurture the relationship, conflict lessens. So that's the end in the nurture. So in all of those stories, that's what resonated with me, is that self-awareness piece, to know here's what I want, here's what I can do, here's what I can't do, but then also creating that invitation for people to leverage their superpowers to help you get there, and then consistently nurture those relationships and nurture yourself for continuous growth. Um, I think that was the separator for me, for those leaders that gave those speeches that won that award. And I know leaders that you have to apply for the award, but I know leaders who they didn't win the award, but they could win it if they applied for it. So that's the differentiator, I think, between really great leaders. There are some good leaders who can do the W part, but they're not really good at the other two. But it works. And then I think there's some bad leaders who don't do any of that. They're not self-aware. They want to do it all. They don't let people um, leverage their strength, and they have no relationship.
Mhm.
So that's what when I think about my leadership philosophy, that's the type of leader I want to be. Those are the type of leaders I try to connect with, and those are the organizations I want to help build through my keynotes, my workshops, my training. I want to help build those types of things, and shed light on how they could do it.
That is so beautiful. And that takes us right to the end. So, those who want to work with you, how can they find you, Terry?
You can find me on LinkedIn at Terry L. Lee. You can find me at my website at www.tlspeaks.com. That's TLSPEAKS.com. Email terry@tlspeaks.com. And then Instagram at tleespeaks. TL
And
Speaks not available.
I follow you on Instagram, and I gotta tell you, I love everything you post. So
Well,
I'm
thank you.
a fan of your posts.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. And we'll talk soon.